that you've taken your ProSENDR out of the box and you're ready to start utilizing it, we want to give you a little bit of information as to how to put it on and how to use it. It is one of the only 3-in-1 training aids on the market. So let's get started. Sean, go ahead and put this on your trail wrist. And you'll notice when Sean puts it on, every hand position is slightly different for every golfer. He's going to wiggle this around to make sure that he's got it set to where that little lip is on his trigger finger. That's going to help him get in the proper set angle at the top of the golf swing. Now, before we get into utilizing the compression sphere, you can take a few light swings like this and try to feel the cradle in the back of the wrist. This is going to incentivize you to become a better player. Then, once you get comfortable with that, Sean, let me show them where we can take the wrist cuff off the cradle and utilize it purely in a manner of just utilizing the compression sphere. This allows you to feel a force vector on the grip, squeezing. This is great for shallowing the golf club in transition and creating connection in the golf swing.
And remember, as Ben Hogan talked about, trying to keep your elbows closer and closer to each other in the backswing was one of his main things. So Ben talked about keeping the elbows close to each other. In modern instruction, we refer to that as external shoulder rotation. And then he also said he wished he was born with 3 right hands so he could pour the power into the golf club on the way down.
Yeah, and I think it's really unique training aid that doesn't really impact you at the moment of truth when you're striking the ball. The ability to lay that hand into the cradle but not have it force you into an awkward position as you're striking. Every golfer has a different release pattern. So this allows you to be in the cradle for an ability to get to a point as you're leading into the ball that creates the right angle of attack, the right delivery, but gives you the freedom to release the golf club.
And that's what we know, right, from all the data that we've seen, is it's really important to be able to get that cradle onto that right wrist almost like a waiter's tray, because even at that space, what we refer to as a square club face or even a shut club face with different players, that face is still very open to the plane coming down. So everybody who's hitting the ball straight, they're all releasing it, and that's the most important part. So get it into a strong position in the backswing where you've basically accomplished all that you need to do to allow you then to close the face at different rates of closure to hit whatever shot that you want.
And I think it's quite unique that the compression sphere, which is removable, we can add it, take it off, but we can also move it linear up and down the forearm because everyone's grip condition is slightly different. And it's a unique tool because it is completely collapsible. So if it happens to bump the top of the golf club or you feel it on the inside wrist, it is very pliable. This is very, very important because it's not going to feel awkward while striking. So you can go ahead and start with just the cradle, I would recommend. Then you can add the ball to it, or you can simply hit shots with just the compression sphere on there. So there's a lot of opportunities here, and that's what we want to bring to you is versatility when you're practicing in an ability to create a pro-level golf swing. One really, really unique feature of this is it limits what we call radial deviation of the wrist. That seems like a term that maybe you're not understanding. That's fine. It's the up and down motion of the wrist. And many golfers, especially amateurs, especially golfers that are aging, have a reduction in their turn. Their arm swing gets short and they try to get length in their backswing by over-hinging the wrists. This will optimize your ability to feel width, height, and rotation because of the lack of ability to dump the wrists off. This creates connection in the golf swing.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things that we see with PGA Tour players is from the top of the backswing is how fast their right arm straightens on the way down. So all this idea about keeping my elbow bent and keeping it this way, we just absolutely don't see that with world-class players. So when I'm able to put all those angles into position, then I'm able to straighten my arm on the way down, which is going to allow people to keep the center of mass behind them, which is one of the things that's going to help square the face. And then 2, with the right arm in that position, as it straightens, that also helps to get the club face square, because what we're dealing with amateur golfers is slicers. So the first thing that you have to attack is the club face, and the club face will incentivize, and the hands and arm swing will incentivize how the body's supposed to work. So basically, right at this wrist segment and hand segment, that's kind of the GPS for the golf swing. So if we do those things right, it's unbelievable how many effects that we get for free that are going to improve people really quickly.
So you're about to definitely improve your golf swing by watching the following protocols. So feel free now to go to Protocol 1. All right, we have a greater understanding of how the ProSENDR works. Now we're going to move into our first protocol. You've got it on your trail wrist. We're going to work with Sean on a proper takeaway and gaining some awareness with the ProSENDR.
Okay, so if you'll set up there for me, Joe. Okay, so we're into a good setup now. And now what's really important in the golf swing is the first 2 or 3 feet, because the golf swing happens very quickly and we don't have much time to make manipulation, especially once we get to the top, there's almost no manipulation to the bottom because the time frame's 2/100ths of a second. What you do initially is very, very important. So how you start is often how you will finish. So Joe, when you take the club back there for me, okay, what we're trying to see as early as possible, okay, and the thing I love about the ProSENDR is that when this right elbow gets too bent, it's really hard for people to make good contact, but this right wrist needs to be bent into extension. So when Joe puts his hand into the back of this wrist cradle, what we'll see there is, if you take it back, Joe, and it's not on there, we can see in that point how open the face is going to get. So by getting the face more square, we're going to create a torque. So we're going to twist, and that position right there now gets this right forearm in pronation and this right wrist in extension. And that's no different to Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or any position that we're throwing anything or releasing something. So from this part right here, take it back down. Okay, give me another one. So that's really the goal, is to get it on there as fast as possible. So we're not really talking about plane. We're not talking about anything like that. If you start over from the bottom, so if you take that thing back wide and start to create torque, this is always going to put the mass of the club very close to the same position. Some people might have the club head a little bit inside, some might have it more neutral, and some might have it more outside. All of those are comparable, and all those are useful based on who you are. So when we see different golf swings on the PGA Tour, they can look a lot different, but if you're looking at some of these places that I'm referring to, they're all identical.
So Joe, you're going to want to do that about 15 times back and forth for Protocol 1 until you get very comfortable setting the right wrist into the wrist cradle.
And let's see that, Joe. Show us a few of those. Okay, and the thing I like about the right wrist more than the left wrist is, for the most part, all this talk about bowing of the left wrist and what have you, and we'll cover that later, but ideally, we're right-handed golfers most of the time who are right-handed people. So this is our supercomputer, this right hand. So I've really struggled in all of my years teaching, trying to get right-handed golfers to create some idea into their left, and that's why we did it on the right wrist and not the left wrist. Okay, do it again, Joe. Okay, so that gives you the feedback. The other thing that's great about the ProSENDR versus a lot of other training aids is that you're responsible for getting the wrist into the cradle. So it's not doing it for you. And so that's how you're learning, all right? And as soon as the right wrist touches it, that reception goes back to the brain and it checks it off as a efficient rep. Back down. So that's the good part. He has to do that himself, and that, from a motor standpoint, is how he's going to build the program. If it's doing it for you, you're not learning.
So for Protocol 1, do this 15 reps. Get comfortable laying the right wrist into the wrist cradle, and then move on to Protocol 2.
And that's the thing that's important about this. When you're doing it, it's not just sitting there and doing it. I want you to be really present and really focused while you're doing it, and try to really feel it happening. So it's not just that you're doing reps, it's the level of focus that you have when you're doing reps.
You've made your way through Protocol 1, working very diligently on getting to the right takeaway position, laying the back of the trail wrist into the wrist cradle, getting comfortable. You're ready to move on to the top of the backswing. You'll notice that we have not introduced the compression sphere yet. We want you to be fully comfortable with the wrist cradle before we move on to that. Sean, let's talk about, where do we go from takeaway to the top?
Okay, so I think what's really important, and what I love about the ProSENDR and how it's very effective, is that golf is a game that we play with our hands and arms. So when they talk about Tiger Woods, they talk about what great hands he has. When they talk about Lydia Ko, they talk about what great hands she has. Unfortunately, golf instruction gets too much related to the body and how we generate power and do all of that. But all great players are very effective with what they do to the golf club, the forces and torques they put in. So when you set up there, Joe, what the hands and arms are going to do is they're going to incentivize. How far can you go back, Joe, without using any of your body? Okay, now put this into the cradle. All right, now from there, what are you going to have to do to power up the rest of your backswing? How are you going to get time? What are you going to have to use? So see, this is the great thing, is that when you practice with this, you'll probably be able to only get to 3/4. The golf swing will get longer when you're hitting balls because we're obviously adding momentum. But as you can see, Joe's had to turn and tilt here at a 1-to-1 ratio to get that in place. But the beautiful part about this part here is that he's already almost preset impact. And that's what we want to do at the top of the backswing, is all the discussion about the moment of truth being at impact. Well, from here to impact, he's got 2/100ths of a second. So for example, if these wrist angles are opposite, there's no way in that time frame that he's going to be able to get that club face square without using a lot of manipulations from the arms and the body. So by being in this position, go back down to the start. Okay, so get that right wrist in the cradle, nice and wide through that start. What do you have to do with the body to help you create the rest of the backswing? Okay, so this is where we're going to see some vertical force, this is where we're going to see torque, and this is where we're going to see some lateral shift. So remember, things like weight shift are completely natural. Human beings are walkers. We're known to weight shift from left to right, left to right. By making the hands and arms become the incentive, we can teach the body what it needs to do. And within knowing that everyone moves slightly unique, we might have to make certain adjustments to each, which will be followed up in ProSENDR Nation.
And the unique design of the ProSENDR allows, Joe, go ahead and stay up at the top. It has a trigger finger cover, if you will, that limits your ability to overhinge. So many people that don't rotate properly, they get to here and they kind of cheat it. They overextend their wrists, dump it, it wrecks your timing. Now you're not in sync with the rest of your body rotation. But when you're limited in your radial extension of the wrist, that forces you to elevate the arms and pivot the body to get to a proper wide and high backswing. Now you're in a much more powerful position to deliver the club. As Sean said, you were already pretty much in an impact condition up here preset by leaving it in the cradle. So you're going to work on this in protocol 2. You're going to get to the end of the takeaway and you're going to just do some pivots and arm lifts where the wrist is already laid in the cradle. Do that 15 times before you move on to protocol 3. Okay, we're moving right along. You've worked on the takeaway. We've got you now to the top of the backswing in a really wonderful position. As Sean mentioned earlier, we've rotated at the top, we've got width, high arms, and you'll notice we've created a very flat left wrist when the club is appropriately laid in the back of the cradle, incentivizing Joe to really make a good transition on the way down. Most players that have stood the test of time on the PGA Tour have this condition. They're not in full extension of cupped wrist, and they're not super bowed over the test of time. That's what we're trying to create, a very neutral standard position. So now that you're in this position, we're going to move in to that transition back to halfway down. Sean?
Yeah, so regardless of what we see on video, when we break it down, what we would see first from here is that as Joe would start down, his hands would travel towards me, and this right arm would be getting straight. So at that point, you can see how that left arm's come straight down. Now, obviously, when he's doing this, his body's going to be rotating, which gives it the effect that the hands go out. So if you start from the bottom again, take it to the top. Okay, we've seen the popularization of this really bowed left wrist, that there's probably 4 or 5 unicorns on tour who are athletic enough to do it. But remember, when you talk to great players, they talk about how they release it. So once I've set it into this position, I don't have to use my hands as much when I go to release it. What's going to happen from there is that as I start down, I'm still going to keep the pressure onto this, but as those arms are straightening and they're working down, you can see that the club head stays behind the hand path. This is actually the most guaranteed way to shallow the golf club. We can see where a lot of people want to take the arms out and do all that, but then that opens the face even more. So from the bottom, Joe, up to the top. Okay, and now from here is just start to straighten those arms as they work down, but keeping the right wrist into that position. So now we're in a place where we're not going to have to manipulate the club too much. And as he just keeps moving down into impact, that puts him into the position that he needs to be in. So we're trying to basically take 1 or 2 steps out of it to make it more efficient and make sure that you don't have to manage as many different things to make good contact with the ball.
So what we're going to do in this protocol is start from the top, working into transition to halfway down. Your objective here is to keep the back of the trail hand in the cradle, feeling that movement, trying to connect that to the brain where you feel that touch on the back of your hand, getting to that halfway down position where halfway down the club is still trailing the hand path and in the cradle. Do that 15 times before moving on to the next protocol. We've worked through a lot of protocols so far. We started with the takeaway into the top of the backswing, understanding how the ProSENDR works, moved into our last position prior to striking the ball, the halfway down point where the shaft's parallel to the ground. The club shaft is trailing the hands by leaving the back of the right hand in the wrist cradle. You're incentivized to feel that against your hand. We're leaving it there to the last parallel. Joey, why don't you go ahead and take us to that spot, and Sean's gonna discuss getting from here, which is that really important position leading into impact, to the ball. Sean?
Yeah, and basically what we're trying to do here is we're just already trying to be at impact, okay? Because what we know is that this club is going to be closing at a high rate, regardless. That's every single person in the world, just to different levels. But 2 from here is that if this right wrist was to stay constantly like that, it'd be hard to obviously hit the ground. So from this point, as Joe gets into impact, if he kept his right wrist on there the whole time, he'd be able to flight the ball a lot. So go back to that position again. Okay, so from here now, as it's on there, as you start releasing the club, which means you're starting to lengthen it, getting it to where it's more neutral, you can feel how that's come off the back. All right, so it's really important is that as we start down, we keep it on there. Now, it's going to be really hard for us to keep it on there just based on the mechanics and the physics of the swing. So as we start down through here, as all these other things are taking place from the ground and the body, as all of this is starting to slow down and decelerate, all that is starting to accelerate, and that's what we mean by releasing the golf club. So as I've talked to, is when the club is up here, even if it's Adam Scott, the face is still massively open to the plane line that it's on. So as Joey's able to keep that on there, almost feeling just pre-impact, okay? This feeling here is something that we'll probably never be able to accomplish in real speed, because as the arms are starting to slow down, the club is starting to speed up. And so as long as we can keep in the right sequence and keep that hand path down and in, and that there, you could feel in this protocol that as you get into impact, you're still maintaining this, but that would be really, really difficult to do when you're at top speed. But it's definitely a good feeling to have, because the club is designed to actually swing past the body. The club is heavy on the bottom, light on the top, so it's based to be in a pendulum anyway. So as I'm able to get to the top and feel like as I come down to about hip high that I still have that angle on there, then everything else is just going to take care of itself, rather than us trying to get it from the top. Yeah. Ideally, as we keep the arms down and in and the club behind us, we're creating all the conditions that in space, the body's going to go ahead and let it go. So it's very similar to someone playing second base. Is the guy sitting there getting ready to catch the ball, he moves to catch the ball, but then from there, we see his arm in the video like this, but his whole intention is to throw the ball from there. So when we come down into here, we've got the right wrist on it, but that right arm is already straight, and that's going to allow us to put the most amount of energy into the ball, because the moment arm is longer, and I'll have a lot more like muscular strength if I'm hitting that object with my arm in full extension. So once again, it's just another feel versus real where the ProSender really helps people, is getting them to understand. The times I've used it with amateurs, they can't believe how long they're supposed to keep the right wrist in the cradle. And it becomes, once they can feel that and they have that aha moment, they're able to replicate it a lot faster.
And I think it's really interesting, back to our point earlier, that most training aids force you into a position. And the way we design this, we want to give you a destination. That destination is to lay your hand into the back of that cradle. But you certainly are able to, on your own, come fully out of it. And we want that because we want you to take responsibility for your own improvement. We're giving you a destination, but it's your job to learn and feel and repeat these positions rather than being held. When you're held in a position, as soon as this comes off, you're going to be right back to where you were before. There's no learning and motor skill development. So again, holding that in as long as you can. But the great thing about it is at impact, you're not in an awkward position. You have the ability to release, come out of it, and move through the ball.
Look, what we know by looking at the data of pro golfers is the left wrist is in flexion to some extent, could be anywhere from 5 to 11 degrees. And the right wrist is still slightly in extension, okay? Part of that is because the left wrist at the top and the right wrist were way more in flexion and extension. So we know as the club is going down, as it's starting to release and get past us so we can generate club head speed, is that we are releasing it, but we are also seeing that in 2/100ths of a second, it's almost impossible from here to overdo that coming down, which is what makes it so important as far as a feedback loop from contact back to the brain.
So Joe, go ahead and go to the last moment where the shaft's parallel to the ground on the way down. In this protocol, I want you to do this 15 times. You're just going to feel pressure under the left leg, a straightening of the left side, and the wrist extending to get back to the ball. You're going to feel that forward shaft lean slightly and feel that momentum where you're keeping it on the cradle, but it's going to be allowed to come out and have the shaft line up a little bit closer to the grip at impact. Congratulations, we're headed towards our final protocol. We're at the moment of truth at impact where we're creating force on the ball, compression, and we're going to move into our finished position. Sean, why don't you go ahead and take us through from impact to the finish and give us the couple options of what we have to work with here.
Well, once again, when we're dealing with loft here, right? So it's not going to be indicative that at the end of the swing that your right hand is still on the club. That will allow you to do that, if you do that, to hit different shapes and different flights. But what we definitely want to see from here is that as Joe goes through the ball, his arms are going to be as long as possible on the follow through, okay? So from this arms extending, we can see that this hand now has literally gone into ulnar. Ulnar is going this way, and now it's come off of that. So if it was to stay on it, that's going to feel like he's going to hit a lot more of a flighted shot and a held shot. But we're going to see at this point that the club, when the arms are extended and all the energy's gone into the golf club, that it's going to come off here slightly. So that's really important. And I think that's the issue with some of the other training aids, is when they keep it on there, it's just not naturally allowing us to do what we need to do in order to create speed and get the ball going down the fairway. So from this standpoint, as he gets to the finish, what we'll see a lot with pro golfers, as they vertically hinge this club back up again, you'll feel it back on there again. So go down to the bottom. First, show me the extension. So get the hands and arms extended away from you. And now from here, as you start rehinging it, it gets back on there. So the club coming down this way, moving into impact, and then as we work on extension and rehinging it, all of that in real time is going to be what's going to help us proficiently come from in through here, compression, extension, and then reconnecting to the cradle. And that is how you're going to be able to release the club, because you're getting rid of the angle and then you're recreating the angle on that side. So that is going to be like a massive breakthrough for a lot of people, especially with the ability to feel it, because I've always found that concept is very difficult to teach people. So the fact that it's going to be able to keep it on it and then lose it and then recreate it on the way through is really imperative to how the club moves on the plane and moves within the path.
And this is what we want you to work on. We've gone through all these protocols. This is to get you started. We have advanced protocols that you will have access to purchase that will really do a deep dive and really get moving into the next direction. We're going to hit shots using the ProSENDR. We're going to introduce the compression sphere that you haven't seen us talk about yet, which is a game changer, giving you the ability to really shallow the golf club, really feel connection. But this is a great way to start utilizing the cradle, get comfortable with it, and then move on to the advanced protocols and really get some really great insight into improving your game. So enjoy the ProSENDR and play well. So we've had a lot of discussion so far about the uses of the ProSENDR, and again, we've mentioned earlier, it is one of the very few training aids on the market that has a 3-in-1 use. You can use the wrist cradle without the sphere, you can use it with the sphere, or you can use the sphere and the wrist cuff alone. So we've now progressed on. Joey spent a lot of time working with the wrist cuff, the cradle, and now we're moving into just utilizing the compression sphere. And we're going to go over here, Sean, of what different uses we can do. So he's come out of a practice session where he's really put some time in feeling the back of the right wrist into the cradle. And now he's saying, okay, I want to see if I can replicate that feel or that look or that sensation without it on, but I want to work into the connection feel and I want to work on a little bit of shallowing. So there's a couple different modes that we can use this ball. And again, folks, we talk about how versatile this is. This just comes on and off with Velcro. No more, having to fumble with the ball on the ground, and he can just move around his practice session with ease. So what we're trying to do is really make sure that ball is low and close to the wrist. Sean, talk to us about why that's important.
Well, what's really important is that there's a lot of talk about the elbows and the shoulders, but really what happens at the wrist segment governs what happens up the arm. So what happens at the foot and ankle governs what happens above it. All right. So when we have something like this where we're looking for feedback, so kinesthetic feedback and feel, if you go ahead and grip that right now, okay, in the most modern physics in the game talks about that in between these two hands that we create a net force vector. So I know that the word is maybe slightly hard to understand, but there's opposing forces going on between the left and the right hand here. So we're creating force and we're creating torque. So the closer I can keep to that, to go back to what Ben Hogan said all those years ago about always trying to feel like his elbows were getting closer and closer together, why talk about the elbows when I can go to the segment of the arm that really defines what that is? So when we get into position here, okay, what we're going to do is just hit us a few like 30, 40 yard shots. All right. And what I want you to do is start with that where you feel the pressure on it. And then from there is I want you to maintain that same amount of pressure between the forearms on the ball.
So that would be, Sean, like a Jason Day style, less hinged, very matched up arm and body pivot.
Well, the thing is, remember, part of the reason that we set the wrist in the backswing with the ProSENDR and then release it is to pick up velocity. But when it comes to hitting these shots, it's about being able to govern and control the speed. So when I get in here and I've got the ball between my hands and I'm really going to try and hit these shots with no hands at all, when I'm hinging and unhinging, that's a moment arm, so that's always picking up speed. So if I can set up there and then feel like this doesn't change, then I'm able to make aggressive swings, but don't have to worry about the ball going too far.
I think the other thing just to mention to everyone here is the unique structure of this sphere was intended to get the object as close to the top of the wrist and as close to the butt end of the club as possible. And that's why we've made this collapse upon itself. And this is a design that really allows that ball to be very, very close to our hands.
Yep, and that's the other thing too is, a big word that's happened in golf over the last, 4 or 5 years is shallowing, okay? So we have one shallow, which is attack angle at impact, but by shallowing, what the definition really is is once again, is the center of mass of the club is staying behind the direction that the hands are traveling, all right? So this has been happening since 1920, all right? So ideally what happens when Joe puts that in there is when he gets to the top of the backswing, okay, if he then increases the compression on the ball, then what happens is that throws this right wrist more into extension, this right shoulder more into external rotation, and gets the shaft to pitch even more to where the center of mass is more behind the hands. So if we're doing that and we feel from there, like this would do it too, but the problem is when I have an outward movement with my left arm, I open the face. Okay, so if we're gonna do this correctly, the shallowing doesn't have to be so much, it's just literally go to no pressure. There you go, now compress it. You can just see naturally because of the couple force we create here and how the wrists are starting to work into flat left wrist, slightly flexed, extended, that's what gets it behind. Now, as the arms work down and the arms straighten, so now I'm here, right? What are you gonna have to do to make contact with that ball? What do you feel like this is incentivizing your body to do?
Turn.
Show me. Right, so the thing is, the better that I get Joe to get the club to lay down, but the right way, where I'm still gonna be not opening the face, then he goes, man, I feel like turning. Now set up again for me. Okay, take it up. Okay, take it to there. Now I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna cup it and almost flex this right wrist. Now I'm coming down. See how the ball's out of there now? Okay, now the club would be coming down here, wouldn't it? Okay, now what do you feel like you need to do to hit it straight?
Throw my hand.
And extend, right?
Yeah.
So how are you gonna get into impact now? There you go. So he just naturally said, man, I'm here, I need to turn. Then I put him here and he goes, well, now I feel like I gotta stand up and use my hands.
Yeah.
So I'm not telling you to turn, but your hands and arms are telling you to turn. Where the weight of the club is coming from is telling you to turn. So when we get that opposite, people will say, hey, stay in your posture, stay in your spine angle. But if they get the club over here and stay in their spine angle, they're gonna hit the ground so hard that there's no way their brain's gonna let them stay in their spine angle. So
Absolutely.
what this is right here is this is the genesis of cause and effect in the golf swing. And this with the ProSENDR, with the wrist cradle, is together, you are guaranteeing that you're gonna get so many other movements in the swing for free as long as you can move properly, because these are two of the most important segments in the whole golf swing.